At the turn of the 20th century, a select few millionaires embarked on a monumental gamble. They dreamed of constructing the grandest hotels ever seen, places of unimaginable luxury, boasting marble floors, gold-plated fixtures, and legions of staff at their beck and call. Yet these weren't built to turn a profit. They were monuments of ego, designed to flaunt wealth with no concern for their financial viability. But what happens when the pursuit of excess bankrupts the very men who created these palaces? The fate of these hotels would reveal a stunning twist. Long after their builders collapsed under financial ruin, the hotels themselves endured, thriving in ways their creators never imagined. The dream that demanded everything. In the world of Gilded Age millionaires, the greatest asset was not wealth. It was the power to shape the world around you. Money could buy land. It could purchase art. But only true power could transform Manhattan's skyline into a personal monument. In 1893, when William Waldorf Astor ordered the demolition of his family mansion at 5th Avenue and 33rd Street, he wasn't clearing space for just another building. He was making room for an empire. The Waldorf Hotel rose on that spot, 13 stories tall, 450 rooms. Every surface gleamed with intention. The lobby featured columns of Vermont marble, each one weighing 3 tons. The dining room seated 500 guests beneath chandeliers that cost more than most Americans earned in a lifetime. Astor spared nothing. He imported 2,000 Oriental rugs from Persia. He commissioned custom silverware bearing his family crest. He hired 300 staff members to serve guests who might never come. This was not business. This was warfare conducted through architecture. 4 years later, John Jacob Astor IV built the Astoria Hotel directly next door. Taller, grander, connected to his cousin's building through a corridor, nicknamed Peacock Alley. Together, they formed the Waldorf Astoria, a single entity that consumed an entire city block. The two cousins despised each other, yet they created something neither could have built alone. The numbers told a story of madness disguised as ambition. The combined Waldorf Astoria employed over 1,000 people. The ratio was staggering. Nearly 2 staff members for every guest room. Bellhops, maids, cooks, doormen, concierges, and valets moved through marble halls like a small army. The cost of operating this machine ran to millions of dollars per year, far exceeding any reasonable expectation of revenue. But the Astors were not alone in this pursuit. Across town, Cornelius Vanderbilt II was building his own testament to excess. The Breakers in Newport, Rhode Island, became his summer escape. 70 rooms, 33 servants worked year-round to maintain a house the family used for just 10 weeks each summer. The Great Hall featured gilded walls and a ceiling painted by Italian masters. Marble came from Italy and Africa. The kitchen alone contained 6 separate cooking stations. The cost approached $7 million in 1895 money. In today's terms, that equals roughly $200 million for a vacation home. Then came the Plaza. Opening in 1907 at 5th Avenue and Central Park South, it represented the culmination of this architectural arms race. Henry Hardenberg designed it as a French Renaissance chateau. 800 rooms, 1,600 staff members at peak operation. The Palm Court featured marble from Siena. The ballroom could accommodate 1,000 guests. The basement contained its own power plant, ice-making facility, and carpentry shop. The builders justified these expenses with a simple philosophy. Profit was for merchants. Legacy was for titans. they believed their names would echo through centuries because of these buildings. William Waldorf Astor imagined tourists visiting his hotel in the year 2000 still speaking his name with reverence. Cornelius Vanderbilt saw the breakers standing for 500 years, a permanent reminder of his family's supremacy. The men behind the plaza envisioned their creation outlasting every other building in New York. They were right about longevity, wrong about profit, and catastrophically mistaken about their own survival. The question that haunted these projects from the beginning was simple enough to ask, but impossible to answer. How could buildings this expensive ever pay for themselves? The mathematics never worked. Operating costs exceeded revenue from the first day. Yet the builders pushed forward, convinced that grandeur itself possessed a value beyond mere numbers. What they were creating would outlive them all, but not in the way they imagined. When luxury became the ultimate weapon. For these billionaires, a gilded lobby wasn't just for show. It was a statement that wealth itself was not enough to define them. The Gilded Age understood something modern observers often miss. Luxury was a language. Every detail spoke. Every choice sent a message. When you entered the Waldorf Astoria and saw 24-karat gold leaf covering the ceiling of the main dining room, you were not simply witnessing decoration. You were reading a declaration of supremacy. Gold was chosen because it never tarnished. The symbolism was intentional. These men wanted to communicate that their wealth was permanent, untouchable, immune to the decay that affected ordinary fortunes. The fact that gold leaf cost 100 times more than paint mattered less than the message it sent. I am beyond the concerns of normal men. Consider the staircases. In most hotels, stairs were utilitarian, a means of moving between floors. At the plaza, the grand staircase became theater. Carved from Caen limestone imported from France, it swept upward in a curve designed to display women's gowns to maximum effect. Each step was slightly longer than standard to slow the descent, creating a natural pause for observers to admire those descending. The balustrade alone cost $40,000. That single architectural feature cost more than the average American worker earned in 20 years. But the true extravagance lived in details most guests never noticed. The Waldorf Astoria maintained its own full-time florist. Not a person who arranged delivered flowers, but a dedicated greenhouse operation that produced fresh blooms daily. Orchids, roses, and exotic tropicals filled every public space. The annual cost of flowers exceeded the salary of a United States senator. When asked why such expense was necessary, the manager replied that wilted flowers suggested wilted fortune. Temperature control reached obsessive levels. Before modern air conditioning existed, the plaza employed a team of workers who adjusted windows and vents throughout the day to maintain exact comfort levels in every room. Dius, summer. Blocks of ice weighing 300 pounds each were positioned in basement chambers, with fans blowing air across them. The cooled air traveled through specially designed ducts. In winter, steam heat kept rooms at precisely 68 degrees. This system required constant human monitoring. 6 men worked in shifts around the clock, adjusting valves and checking thermometers. The staff-to-guest ratio revealed the deepest truth about these operations. At the Breakers, 33 servants attended a family of 7. At the Waldorf Astoria, 1,000 employees served fewer than 500 guest rooms. At the Plaza, the ratio reached its extreme, nearly 2 staff members per room. This meant that on any given night, more people worked in the building than slept in it as paying guests. Each employee required training, supervision, uniforms, meals, and wages. The cost compounded daily. Uniforms alone represented a significant expense. Doormen wore custom-tailored coats with brass buttons. Maids received 6 different uniform sets for different times of day and different tasks. Waiters in the main dining rooms wore white tie and tails, outfits most Americans would wear only to their own weddings. The laundry operation to maintain these uniforms employed 20 people working full-time. Food service pushed beyond any rational limit. The Waldorf Astoria maintained separate kitchens for different cuisines: French, Italian, American. Each kitchen had its own staff, its own chef, its own completely stocked pantry. Waste was enormous. Fresh ingredients that went unused each day were discarded. The hotel's policy forbade serving anything that wasn't prepared that same day. Estimates suggest that up to 30% of purchased food was thrown away. This was the point. Excess proved you could afford excess. The builders justified this approach with aristocratic logic. European nobility had always maintained large staffs and elaborate estates regardless of cost. American millionaires saw themselves as creating a new aristocracy, one based not on bloodlines, but on accumulated wealth. If the old aristocracy could sustain Versailles, surely American industry could sustain the plaza. But European aristocracy had centuries of accumulated wealth and land that generated ongoing revenue. American fortunes, however large, were newer, more fragile, and more dependent on continued business success. The difference would prove fatal. The psychological motivation ran deeper than simple showing off. These men genuinely believed that creating beauty and grandeur was a kind of immortality. They saw themselves as Medici princes, funding a renaissance. Their hotels would stand for centuries. Tourists would visit. Historians would write. Future generations would speak their names. In this, they were partially correct. People do still speak of the Astors and Vanderbilts. The hotels do still stand. But the story took a turn none of them anticipated. The very features that made these hotels magnificent guaranteed their financial failure. The equation was simple and brutal. Higher costs meant higher room rates. Higher room rates meant fewer guests. Fewer guests meant lower revenue. Lower revenue meant operating losses. Operating losses meant borrowing. Borrowing meant debt. Debt meant vulnerability. And vulnerability, in the end, meant collapse. The builders' reach for immortality. When William Waldorf Astor opened the Waldorf Astoria in 1893, he wasn't just opening a hotel, he was staking his claim to history. Astor understood something fundamental about memory. Buildings outlast men. Stone endures when flesh fails. If he wanted his name to echo beyond his own lifetime, he needed to create something that couldn't be erased. A hotel offered the perfect solution. It would be used daily, photographed constantly, discussed in newspapers. His name would appear in conversation thousands of times each year. He was born into wealth, so vast it seemed immune to destruction. His great-grandfather, John Jacob Astor I, had built a fortune in fur trading and Manhattan real estate. By the time William inherited his share, the family controlled property across New York City. He could have lived comfortably on rental income alone. Instead, he spent $17 million building a hotel that would lose money every year of his ownership. The decision baffled business analysts of his time. One financial journalist wrote that Astor had constructed the most expensive monument to personal vanity ever seen in America. The criticism missed the point entirely. Astor wasn't trying to make money. He was trying to make history. His cousin, John Jacob Astor IV, operated from similar motivations but different wounds. As the younger branch of the family, he felt perpetually overshadowed. Building the Astoria Hotel next to the Waldorf was his answer. He would match his cousin dollar for dollar, room for room, chandelier for chandelier. The competition consumed both men. Neither could afford to be outdone. John Jacob Astor IV added features that defied explanation. He installed the first hotel swimming pool in America. Not a small pool, but a Roman bath-style chamber with imported tile and underwater lighting. The cost of heating the water exceeded the revenue from guests who used it. But the newspaper coverage was priceless. Every article about the pool mentioned his name. He died on the Titanic in 1912. One of the wealthiest men in the world, he gave up his seat in a lifeboat and perished in the North Atlantic. His hotel outlived him by decades. The irony would have pleased him. Cornelius Vanderbilt II approached immortality through different mathematics. He inherited $20 million from his father. Within 2 decades, he had increased it to $200 million through railroad investments. He was, by any measure, the richest man in America. Yet, wealth alone didn't satisfy him. He needed something that couldn't be counted in a ledger. The breakers became his answer. The name itself was symbolic. The house sat on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Waves crashed against rocks below. The breakers were eternal, powerful, unstoppable. Vanderbilt wanted his house to embody those same qualities. He hired Richard Morris Hunt, America's most famous architect. The instructions were simple. Build something that will stand for 1,000 years. Spare no expense. Make it perfect. Hunt delivered. The Great Hall featured 45-foot ceilings. The dining room could seat 34 people beneath a ceiling that required 3 years to paint. Platinum leaf covered certain details because gold wasn't rare enough. The house required 67 servants to operate. Maids, cooks, groundskeepers, stable hands, and personal attendants formed a small village dedicated to maintaining one family's comfort. The annual operating cost exceeded $500,000. This was for a house used 10 weeks per year. The mathematics were absurd, but Vanderbilt wasn't calculating return on investment. He was calculating his place in eternity. He died in 1899 at age 55. His body was buried, but his house remained. Within 2 generations, his descendants couldn't afford to maintain it. The property that was supposed to establish his immortal legacy became too expensive for his family to keep. The pattern repeated across the Gilded Age elite. George Bolt built a castle on an island in the St. Lawrence River as a monument to his wife. When she died during construction, he abandoned the project. It sat unfinished for 70 years, a stone testament to love and loss. Henry Flagler constructed the Breakers Hotel in Palm Beach as his personal kingdom. He died wealthy, but his hotel struggled financially for decades. Each of these men shared a fatal assumption. They believed that wealth and buildings were the same thing. If you built something expensive enough, grand enough, beautiful enough, it would somehow sustain itself. The building would generate its own gravity, pulling in money and prestige simply by existing. Reality proved crueler. Buildings, especially expensive ones, don't generate wealth. They consume it, relentlessly, daily. Every chandelier that needs cleaning, every marble floor that requires polishing, every staff member who expects wages, every coal-burning furnace that needs fuel, all of it demanded constant infusions of cash. The owners imagined their hotels as investments. In truth, they were monuments. And monuments, by definition, cost more than they return. The Egyptian pyramids didn't generate revenue. European cathedrals operated at a loss. American Gilded Age hotels followed the same pattern. But here's what the builders didn't anticipate. Monuments can outlive their creators and find new purposes. The hotels they built as personal testaments would indeed achieve immortality, just not attached to their names, not celebrating their wisdom, and definitely not vindicating their financial decisions. What came next would transform their monuments of ego into something far more practical, far more profitable, and far more resilient than they ever imagined. But first, the bills would come due. The cost of invisibility. In a world where excess is king, the true cost of grandeur is never seen on the surface until it's too late. Behind every glittering chandelier in the Waldorf Astoria hung a financial reality guests never witnessed. 3 full-time workers did nothing but maintain the lighting fixtures. They climbed ladders daily, cleaning each crystal prism by hand. One chandelier contained 4,000 individual pieces. The hotel had 47 chandeliers. You can calculate the hours yourself. This was the nature of invisible cost. Guests saw beauty. Owners paid for maintenance. The plaza's palm court became famous for its elegant atmosphere. Sunlight filtered through stained glass. Palms grew in enormous planters. Musicians played during afternoon tea. What visitors didn't see was the full-time gardener who tended those palms, the glass worker who repaired broken panes, the tuner who serviced the piano twice weekly, and the accountant who tracked the losses generated by serving tea at prices that barely covered the cost of Royal Doulton china. Every luxury feature carried a hidden price tag that extended far beyond the initial purchase. Consider carpets. The Waldorf Astoria featured Axminster carpets throughout its public spaces. Each one was custom woven, depicting elaborate patterns, beautiful, expensive, and completely impractical. The carpets wore out quickly under heavy foot traffic. Replacing them cost $20,000 per floor. This happened every 3 years. A sensible business would have used simpler, more durable carpets. But sensible business wasn't the goal. Visual impact was. So the cycle continued. Purchase, install, wear out, replace, repeat forever. Each repetition hemorrhaged money that could never be recovered through room rates. Staff costs created the deepest financial wounds. The Waldorf Astoria paid its 1,000 employees a combined payroll exceeding $1 million per year. This was in 1895 money. That payroll alone would equal roughly $30 million today. Room revenue couldn't possibly cover it. The hotel charged $5 per night for a standard room. Even if every room stayed occupied every night of the year, which never happened, the revenue would fall short of expenses. The math was brutal. 450 rooms times $5 times 365 days equals $821,250 per year. Against that, payroll alone consumed $1 million. Add maintenance, food, fuel, and taxes, and annual costs exceeded $2 million. The operating loss was baked into the structure itself. William Waldorf Astor could absorb these losses because he owned income-producing properties across Manhattan. Rental income from office buildings and apartment houses covered the hotel's deficits. He was, in effect, subsidizing luxury with commercial real estate. The hotel operated as a kind of expensive hobby, funded by his actual businesses. But this arrangement created a dangerous dependency. As long as his other properties generated sufficient income, the hotel survived. If those properties faltered, everything collapsed. He was balanced on a financial knife edge, sustained only by the breadth of his empire. The breakers in Newport revealed a different category of invisible cost. Vanderbilt spent $7 million to build it. That number appeared in newspapers. What didn't appear was the ongoing cost of ownership. Property taxes alone ran to $70,000 per year. Heating during the winter required burning through mountains of coal. Insurance on a house filled with art and antiques cost another fortune. The 67 servants expected regular wages. Total annual operating cost exceeded $500,000 to maintain a house used for 10 weeks. That meant Vanderbilt spent roughly $50,000 per week of actual occupancy. For context, the average American family at that time survived on $600 per year. Vanderbilt spent more maintaining his summer house for 1 week than 83 families spent surviving an entire year. The wealthy understood these numbers. They simply didn't care. Or rather, they cared about different things. Cost was a problem for merchants. Tycoons measured value differently. They measured prestige, influence, and legacy. By those standards, the expenses were justified. But prestige doesn't pay property taxes. Influence doesn't cover payroll. Legacy doesn't heat 50 rooms through a New England winter. The invisible costs accumulated, silently, relentlessly, creating financial structures that depended entirely on continued massive wealth. Remove that wealth, and the entire edifice collapsed. The plaza took invisible costs to new extremes. The basement contained a complete infrastructure most guests never imagined. A power plant generated electricity for the entire building. A refrigeration system produced ice. A carpentry shop built and repaired furniture. A print shop produced menus and stationery. A separate laundry facility washed thousands of pieces daily. Each of these operations required workers, equipment, and resources. The laundry alone employed 25 people. They worked in basement rooms that reached 110 degrees in summer. Sheets, towels, tablecloths, napkins, and staff uniforms flowed through in an endless cycle. The equipment cost $30,000. Operating it cost another $50,000 per year. Commercial laundry services would have been cheaper. But the plaza insisted on controlling every detail of the guest experience. So they built and staffed their own laundry. Another invisible cost. Food waste reached spectacular proportions. The hotel's kitchens prepared meals for up to 1,000 guests daily, but guest counts fluctuated. A kitchen staffed to handle 1,000 couldn't scale down efficiently for 500. So food was prepared and discarded. Expensive cuts of meat, fresh seafood, imported delicacies. If it wasn't served within hours of preparation, it was thrown out. One estimate from 1910 suggested the plaza discarded food worth $500 per day. Over a year, that totaled $182,500. Wasted, gone, unrecoverable. But the alternative was risking that a guest might receive something less than perfectly fresh. That risk was unacceptable. So the waste continued. The ratio of productive to unproductive space told another hidden story. In a typical hotel, 60% of the building contains guest rooms. The remaining 40% holds lobbies, dining rooms, and service areas. At the plaza, the ratio inverted. Only 40% was guest rooms. 60% consisted of ballrooms, restaurants, lounges, and service areas. All that unproductive space still required heating, lighting, cleaning, and maintenance. But it generated no direct revenue. The grand ballroom could accommodate 1,000 guests. It was used perhaps 50 times per year. That meant for 315 days annually, workers maintained an enormous space that sat empty. They polished the floor, cleaned the chandeliers, dusted the moldings, all to preserve a room that generated income only 15% of the time. This was the invisible cost of grandeur. The public saw glittering parties and elegant dinners. The owners paid for 315 days of expensive emptiness. Insurance created another hidden drain. These buildings contained fortunes in art, antiques, and architectural details. Fire could destroy everything, so insurance costs ran to hundreds of thousands of dollars per year. The Waldorf Astoria paid $90,000 annually just for fire insurance. That was more than $250 per day, every day, whether the hotel was full or empty, whether it made money or lost money. The insurance bill came due. Add it all together: payroll, maintenance, food, fuel, insurance, taxes, invisible costs that guests never saw and owners couldn't avoid. The total exceeded any conceivable revenue stream. These hotels were designed to lose money. They succeeded brilliantly. What the builders failed to anticipate was how long they could sustain these losses. They assumed their wealth was infinite. They assumed their income would always exceed expenses. They assumed wrong. The costs were invisible to guests. But the accountants saw them. The bills accumulated. And eventually, the mathematics would have their revenge. The ghosts in the marble, behind every marble column, behind every gilded chandelier, lurked an unsustainable financial plan. The debt started small: $10,000 borrowed against future revenue, then $50,000, then $500,000. The Waldorf Astoria's balance sheets from 1898 show debts of $1.2 million. This was just 5 years after opening. The hotel was drowning in red ink, sustained only by William Waldorf Astor's willingness to inject personal capital to cover losses. But personal capital, however large, remains finite, and Astor's other business ventures faced their own challenges. The economic panic of 1893 had shaken confidence in real estate. Property values declined. Rental income decreased. His cushion was shrinking while his hotel continued bleeding money at the same relentless pace. John Jacob Astor IV faced similar mathematics with the Astoria. He had borrowed $3 million to finance construction. The loan terms assumed the hotel would generate revenue sufficient to cover interest payments. It did not. In 1900, the Astoria lost $400,000. In 1901, losses topped $500,000. The trajectory was clear and terrifying. The two cousins found themselves trapped in a financial prison of their own construction. They couldn't close the hotels without admitting total defeat. They couldn't sell the hotels because no rational buyer would purchase a business guaranteed to lose money. And they couldn't continue operating without accepting ever larger annual losses. The Marble Palace had become a marble cage. The breakers embodied a different flavor of unsustainability. Cornelius Vanderbilt II died in 1899, leaving the house to his widow, Alice. She maintained it for years through sheer determination and careful management of her inheritance. But property taxes crept upward, maintenance costs increased, staff wages rose. The house that cost $500,000 annually to operate in 1900 cost $700,000 by 1910. Alice's income came from trusts established by her husband. Those trusts generated approximately $1 million per year. After maintaining the breakers and the family's other properties, little remained. She was wealthy, but cash poor, rich in assets, but struggling to cover basic expenses. The house was consuming the fortune that built it. Her children faced an impossible choice: keep the breakers and accept declining financial flexibility, or sell it and lose the family legacy. Either path led to diminishment. The house had become a financial ghost, haunting its owners with demands no amount of money could satisfy indefinitely. The plaza's financial structure was even more precarious. It was built by the Plaza Realty Company, which raised capital through a combination of stock offerings and bonds. Investors were promised returns based on projected hotel revenue. Those projections assumed 80% occupancy and room rates averaging $6 per night. Reality delivered 60% occupancy and average rates of $4.50. The gap between projection and reality measured in hundreds of thousands of dollars. Bond interest payments came due quarterly. The hotel couldn't meet them from operating revenue, so the company borrowed more money to pay interest on existing debt. This is financial death spiral logic. Borrowing to pay interest on borrowed money creates a mathematical trap with only one exit: eventual default. By 1912, the plaza owed bondholders over $5 million. Annual interest alone exceeded $300,000. The hotel had never, in any year of operation, generated that much profit. The debt structure was fundamentally unworkable. Everyone involved knew it. Yet the charade continued because the alternative was admitting the entire venture was a mistake. Hidden among these larger disasters were smaller financial ghosts. The Waldorf Astoria had signed long-term contracts with suppliers that guaranteed specific purchase volumes. The hotel paid for 500 pounds of fresh flowers daily, whether it used them or not. It paid for 1,000 pounds of meat daily, regardless of actual guest count. These contracts locked in costs, while revenue fluctuated with occupancy. Another mathematical impossibility disguised as business planning. Labor contracts created similar inflexibility. The hotel agreed to maintain minimum staff levels year-round. During slow months, the hotel might host 200 guests, but still employed 800 workers. The ratio became absurd: 4 workers per guest. Payroll during those months exceeded revenue from room rentals. But the contracts were binding. The original builders had designed these arrangements during boom times when they assumed perpetual growth. The contracts seemed reasonable when occupancy ran at 80% and the future looked golden. But occupancy declined to 60%, then 50%, then 40% during seasonal lows. The contracts remained. The costs persisted. The losses mounted. Maintenance revealed the cruelest ghost of all. Everything deteriorated. Carpets wore thin, paint faded, fixtures tarnished. In a normal business, you could defer maintenance during hard times. But in a luxury hotel, deferred maintenance showed immediately. A worn carpet in the lobby signaled decline. Tarnished fixtures suggested financial trouble. Peeling paint screamed failure. So maintenance couldn't be deferred, not without risking the very reputation that justified the high room rates. This created a vicious cycle. The hotel needed to maintain its appearance to justify premium pricing. Maintaining that appearance cost a fortune. The fortune exceeded the revenue generated by premium pricing. Therefore, maintaining the appearance guaranteed financial losses. But abandoning the appearance would guarantee even larger losses. Trapped again. The Waldorf Astoria spent $90,000 per year just on paint and wallpaper. The plaza spent $120,000. These were not one-time expenses, but annual recurring costs. Paint faded, wallpaper stained. The cycle never ended. Year after year, decade after decade, the buildings demanded fresh surfaces. Each repainting cost as much as building a small house. The marble might last for centuries, but everything else required constant renewal. Window washing created another hidden ghost. The plaza had 2,600 windows. Each one required cleaning monthly, more often during certain seasons. A team of 12 workers did nothing but wash windows. Their combined annual wages exceeded $30,000 for windows that most guests barely noticed. But dirty windows would have been noticed, so the workers climbed their ladders. The costs accumulated, the ghost persisted. Heating costs fluctuated wildly, but trended forever upward. Coal prices increased. The Waldorf Astoria burned through 150 tons of coal per week during winter. At $5 per ton, that totaled $750 weekly. Over a 5-month heating season, coal alone cost $15,000. Then fuel oil replaced coal, and prices jumped even higher. The building's appetite was insatiable, but the deepest ghost haunting these enterprises wasn't physical, it was psychological. The builders had convinced themselves that grandeur created value through some mysterious alchemy. Build something beautiful enough, expensive enough, impressive enough, and money would follow. The belief was sincere. It was also completely wrong. Value comes from utility, not beauty. A building generates value by serving a need efficiently. These hotels served a need inefficiently, at tremendous cost, with no path to profitability. They were magnificent failures from inception. The builders just took 20 years to realize it. By 1915, the truth was undeniable. The original business model was broken. The buildings themselves were financially haunted by decisions made decades earlier, and the men who made those decisions were running out of resources to sustain their ghosts. The question wasn't whether these hotels would fail. It was when and who would be left holding the debt when they did. When the numbers stopped making sense. What happens when the ledger no longer balances? When the dream that once seemed limitless starts to crumble under its own weight? The first shock came in 1913. The federal government introduced the income tax. For the first time in American history, the wealthy faced systematic taxation of their earnings. The initial rates were modest. 1% on income above $3,000, rising to 7% on income above $500,000. But the precedent was established. The government could claim a share of private wealth. For men like William Waldorf Astor, this changed the entire calculation. Previously, he could use profits from rental properties to subsidize his hotel's losses indefinitely. Now, those profits were taxed before he saw them. His ability to cover deficits had been reduced by federal mandate. The hotel's losses, meanwhile, continued untaxed and unabated. The mathematics shifted from difficult to impossible. Assume Astor earned $2 million from his other properties. 7% tax on income above $500,000 meant he lost $105,000 to federal taxes. Add state and local taxes, and his $2 million income became approximately $1,700,000 in actual spending power. But his hotel still lost $600,000 per year. The remaining $1,100,000 had to cover his personal expenses, other property maintenance, and everything else. The cushion was vanishing. World War I accelerated the deterioration. Labor costs increased as workers demanded higher wages to offset wartime inflation. Food prices doubled. Coal prices tripled. The Waldorf Astoria's annual operating costs jumped from $2 million to $3,200,000 between 1914 and 1918. Revenue increased only marginally. Losses exploded. The plaza faced even worse conditions. Occupancy dropped to 30% during the war years. Wealthy Americans stopped traveling. European visitors disappeared entirely. The hotel, designed to operate at 70% occupancy, was running at less than half capacity, while costs remained fixed. In 1917, losses exceeded $800,000. The bondholders panicked. Default seemed inevitable. Then came the moment when mathematics finally overwhelmed aspiration. What he hears, 1918, John Jacob Astor IV's estate was settled. He had died on the Titanic 6 years earlier. His will revealed a stunning fact. The Astoria Hotel was worth less than the debt secured against it. Years of operating losses had consumed any equity. The property was underwater financially. His heirs could either inject massive new capital or accept default. They chose default. The Astoria went into receivership in 1919. A court-appointed manager took control. The Astor family lost ownership of the building that bore their name. The monument to immortality had lasted 22 years under family control. The stone would endure. The family connection would not. William Waldorf Astor fared slightly better, but not by much. He had moved to England years earlier, becoming a British citizen and buying a castle. His American properties were managed by trustees. In 1920, those trustees informed him that the Waldorf could no longer be subsidized. The other properties needed their revenue to stay solvent. The hotel must either become self-sufficient or be sold. Self-sufficiency was impossible. Sale was the only option. The breakers embodied a different kind of mathematical collapse. Alice Vanderbilt lived into the 1920s, determined to maintain the house regardless of cost. But her income couldn't keep pace with expenses. Property taxes in Newport increased dramatically as the town tried to extract revenue from wealthy summer residents. By 1925, the breakers' annual tax bill reached $120,000. Insurance cost $80,000. Maintenance required another $300,000. Minimum staff cost $200,000. Total annual cost exceeded $700,000. Alice's trust generated approximately $900,000 annually. After maintaining the breakers and covering personal expenses, she had perhaps $50,000 remaining. Her wealth was being consumed by the house. She was growing poorer each year in real terms, even as she remained nominally wealthy. The house was devouring its own foundation. Her children watched this slow-motion disaster with growing alarm. They would inherit the house and its impossible financial demands. The mathematical endpoint was clear. Eventually, the trust would be exhausted. Taxes would go unpaid. The house would be seized. Better to act while options still existed. The plaza changed hands 3 times between 1920 and 1930. Each new owner believed they could solve the financial puzzle. Each failed. The fundamental problem remained unchanged. Operating costs exceeded revenue. Luxury features couldn't be removed without destroying the hotel's identity. Room rates couldn't be raised without driving away the few remaining guests. There was no solution within the existing framework. The stock market crash of 1929 delivered the final blow. Wealthy Americans saw their portfolios evaporate. Discretionary spending on luxury hotels vanished overnight. Occupancy at the plaza dropped to 15%. The hotel lost $1.2 million in 1930 alone. Bankruptcy was filed in 1931. The Marble Palace, built to last forever, couldn't survive 45 years of financial reality. Across Manhattan, a pattern emerged. The grand hotels of the Gilded Age were failing in synchronized collapse. The Netherland, the Savoy Plaza, the Ritz-Carlton all entered bankruptcy or receivership. The business model that seemed invincible in 1890 proved fatally flawed by 1930. The numbers had stopped making sense long ago. Now they had stopped entirely. But here's what the failed owners never understood. The buildings themselves were not the problem. The financial structures were. The hotels as physical entities had value. People needed places to stay. Travelers would always exist. The market for hospitality was real and growing. What failed was the specific business model of owner-operated luxury hotels subsidized by external wealth. Remove that model. Replace the owners. Restructure the debt. Hire professional managers. And suddenly, the numbers could make sense again. Not the same numbers. Not the same business. But viable numbers nonetheless. The original builders had created something accidentally brilliant. They built hotels so well constructed, so beautifully designed, so perfectly located that they had inherent value independent of their creators. The buildings could survive their owners. They could outlive their initial business plans. They could adapt to new economic realities. But first, the old model had to die completely. The men who built these monuments had to lose everything: their wealth, their control, their dreams of immortality through architecture. All of it had to be swept away before something new could emerge from the wreckage. That transformation was about to begin. When debt becomes the only option. As the Gilded lobbies grew darker, the hotel's owners were forced to make an impossible choice: sacrifice their legacy or sacrifice their wealth. William Waldorf Astor made his choice in 1923. Sell. He authorized his trustees to find a buyer for the Waldorf at any price that would clear the debt. The asking price was $8 million. After 2 years of searching, the best offer came in at $5 million. Astor accepted. He had spent $17 million building the hotel 30 years earlier. He sold it for less than a third of that amount. The buyer was a consortium of investors who saw potential the Astors had missed. They understood something crucial. The hotel didn't need to be profitable as currently operated. It needed to be profitable enough to service debt at market interest rates. This was a lower bar, a much lower bar. The investors could succeed where the Astors failed simply by accepting more modest returns. They made immediate changes. Staff was cut by 40%. 800 employees became 480. Service levels declined, but costs dropped dramatically. The full-time florist was eliminated. Flowers were now purchased from wholesale suppliers as needed. The multiple kitchens were consolidated into 2. Waste decreased. The lavish employee benefits were reduced. Healthcare coverage was eliminated. Pension contributions stopped. The hotel became profitable within 2 years. Not wildly profitable, but consistently profitable enough to cover debt payments and generate modest dividends for investors. The original Astor vision of unsustainable luxury was replaced with sustainable upscale service. Guests noticed differences, but continued to patronize the hotel. The Waldorf name still carried prestige, even as the underlying operation became more businesslike. The Astoria followed a similar path under new ownership. The receivership court sold the property in 1924 to a hotel management company. They stripped away the excess while preserving the core luxury experience. Staff cuts, supplier renegotiations, menu simplifications. Everything that didn't directly contribute to guest satisfaction was eliminated. The hotel started generating small profits in 1926. The two hotels merged operations in 1931, becoming the Waldorf Astoria as a truly unified entity. The combined operation achieved economies of scale impossible for either building alone: shared kitchens, shared laundry, shared administrative staff. The merger saved over $200,000 annually while actually improving service consistency. The financial mathematics finally worked. The plaza's transformation was more dramatic. After bankruptcy in 1931, the property was purchased by Conrad Hilton. He brought a completely different philosophy. Hotels were businesses, not monuments. They existed to generate returns for investors. Every decision was evaluated through a financial lens. Does this feature increase revenue? Does this service create profit? If not, eliminate it. Hilton cut staff from 1,600 to 800. He closed unprofitable restaurants. He converted underutilized ballrooms into additional guest rooms. He raised prices for premium services while lowering base room rates to attract more guests. Occupancy increased from 40% to 70% within 3 years. The hotel that lost over $1 million annually under previous owners generated $300,000 in profit in 1935. The breakers faced the most painful transformation of all. Alice Vanderbilt died in 1934. Her children immediately recognized they couldn't maintain the house. The annual cost exceeded their combined available income. They needed to act quickly before debt accumulated. The solution was radical. Donate the house to a preservation society and take a tax deduction. The Preservation Society of Newport County accepted the house in 1948. They converted it into a museum. Admission fees and endowment income covered operating costs. The house that consumed family fortunes now sustained itself through public interest. Tourists paid $2 each to walk through rooms where Vanderbilts once entertained. The supreme irony was complete. The monument to private wealth became a profitable public attraction. Each of these transformations shared a common element. The new owners weren't emotionally invested in maintaining the original vision. They didn't care about legacy or immortality or social position. They cared about cash flow, debt service, and return on investment. This emotional detachment enabled rational decisions the original owners could never make. Cut staff? The Astors would have been horrified. Use wholesale flowers? Vanderbilt would have refused. Close unprofitable restaurants? Original plaza investors would have seen it as admitting failure. But new owners felt no such constraints. They could optimize without sentiment. The debt forced this evolution. When the original owners controlled the properties, they could subsidize losses indefinitely from other income sources. Once debt holders seized control through bankruptcy, that option disappeared. The properties had to pay for themselves. Suddenly, business logic replaced ego logic. The results were transformative. The hotels discovered they could charge less and earn more. Lower prices attracted higher occupancy. Higher occupancy meant better utilization of fixed costs. The kitchens that cooked for 300 guests at 70% occupancy were more efficient than kitchens cooking for 200 guests at 40% occupancy. The mathematics worked in reverse of the original model. Professionalization of management made another crucial difference. The Astors had hired hotel managers who understood service but not necessarily business. The new owners hired managers who understood both. They implemented cost accounting systems. They tracked revenue per room. They analyzed which services generated profit and which generated losses. They made data-driven decisions. One example illustrates the shift. The Waldorf had always provided complimentary newspaper delivery to every room. This cost approximately $50,000 per year when you factored in labor, newspapers, and logistics. The new managers surveyed guests. Only 30% read the delivered newspaper, so they changed the policy. Newspapers available upon request at no charge. 60% of costs eliminated. Guest satisfaction unchanged. Similar optimizations occurred throughout all the hotels. Complimentary shoe shining became available upon request for a small fee. 24-hour room service was reduced to 18-hour room service. Turn-down service became an opt-in amenity rather than standard. Each change saved money without meaningfully reducing the guest experience. The original owners would have seen these changes as cheapening their vision. The new owners saw them as eliminating waste. Both perspectives were valid, but only one was financially sustainable. Debt forced honesty. The hotels couldn't afford to pretend unlimited resources existed. They had to operate within their means. This constraint, resisted so fiercely by the original builders, proved liberating for the next generation of operators. Forced to be efficient, they discovered efficiency didn't require sacrificing quality. It required sacrificing waste. The transformation wasn't painless. Laid-off workers suffered. Suppliers lost lucrative contracts. The hotels became less extravagant in subtle ways. But they survived. More than survived. They thrived. Within a decade of changing ownership, all of these properties operated profitably. The buildings the original owners couldn't make work financially became successful businesses, once freed from the burden of financing their builders' egos. The ultimate irony was this: the hotels achieved the permanence their builders dreamed of, just not on the builders' terms. The stones stood, the names endured, but the vision was transformed. What was meant to be monuments to individuals became monuments to adaptive capitalism. The debt, which seemed like death, turned out to be rebirth. The fall of the giants. In the face of unavoidable ruin, the rich men who built these monuments could only watch as their dreams crumbled before their eyes. William Waldorf Astor died in 1919. He passed away in England, far from the hotel that bore his family name. In his final years, he rarely spoke of the Waldorf. The topic brought only pain. He had built a monument that failed financially during his ownership. The humiliation stung deeper than the monetary loss. He died worth approximately $20 million. Still, wealthy by any standard, but diminished. The hotel he created to establish his immortality instead marked his greatest failure. His obituaries mentioned the Waldorf, but not in the way he had imagined. They described it as a magnificent building that proved too expensive for its creator to maintain. The hotel survived. His ownership didn't. That was the opposite of the intended legacy. John Jacob Astor IV never lived to see the financial collapse of his Astoria. He died on the Titanic in April 1912. His death became one of the most famous casualties of that disaster. He had been traveling with his pregnant 19-year-old second wife, Madeline. He helped her into a lifeboat. He remained behind. His body was recovered days later, identified by the initials on his jacket. His estate revealed uncomfortable truths. Despite being considered one of America's richest men, his actual liquid wealth was much smaller than public perception. Most of his assets were tied up in properties, including the Astoria Hotel. Those properties carried substantial debt. After estate taxes and debt settlement, his heirs received far less than expected. The Astoria itself went to his son Vincent, who tried to maintain it for 7 years before financial reality forced a sale. The hotel his father built as a personal monument became a burden his son couldn't sustain. Cornelius Vanderbilt II died in 1899, spared the knowledge that his house would eventually bankrupt his descendants. But his death itself was partly caused by the stress of maintaining his lifestyle. He suffered a stroke at age 51, partially recovered, then had a second stroke at 55 that killed him. Doctors at the time noted that his level of stress and overwork contributed to his death. He literally worked himself to death, maintaining an empire that included the Breakers. His widow Alice spent the next 3 decades trying to preserve his vision. She succeeded through sheer determination, but at tremendous personal cost. By the 1920s, she was essentially house poor, wealthy on paper, struggling to meet basic expenses. She cut back on social events. She reduced staff when possible. She deferred maintenance when she dared. None of it was enough. The house demanded more than she could give. She died in 1934 at age 89. Her last years were spent watching the world change around her. The Gilded Age was over. The values that justified building the Breakers had been swept away by war, depression, and social transformation. She was an artifact of a dead era, maintaining a house that belonged to history. Her children attended her funeral and immediately began planning how to divest themselves of the property. The institutional owners fared little better. The Plaza Realty Company, which built and initially operated the plaza, declared bankruptcy in 1931. The company's stock, once traded at $40 per share, became worthless. Investors lost everything. The bondholders, who had been promised steady returns, received 30 cents on the dollar in the bankruptcy settlement. The magnificent hotel they financed had destroyed their wealth. George Bolt's story embodied the most personal tragedy. He built the Waldorf Astoria's first incarnation and later constructed a castle on Hart Island in the St. Lawrence River. The castle was meant as a gift for his wife, Louise. He spared no expense: 120 rooms, Italian marble, electric lighting, a complete power plant. The project consumed millions. Louise died suddenly in 1904 before the castle was completed. Bolt immediately ordered all work stopped. He never returned to the island. The castle sat unfinished for 70 years, windows empty, roof leaking, stone slowly crumbling. It became a tourist attraction, visited by boat tour groups who walked through the ruins and photographed the decay. Bolt's monument to love became a monument to abandonment. He died in 1916, still wealthy from hotel management fees, but emotionally broken. The castle remained unfinished. His legacy became not the love he tried to immortalize in stone, but the spectacular waste of building something that would never be completed. The pattern repeated across the entire generation of Gilded Age builders. Henry Flagler died in 1913. His Florida hotels struggled financially for decades. Henry Morrison Flagler, who had been John D. Rockefeller's partner in Standard Oil, couldn't make hotels profitable. If an oil baron couldn't do it, the business model itself was flawed. Oscar Waldorf Astor died in 1935. He had been one of the Waldorf Astoria investors. His share of losses over 40 years exceeded $2 million. He was still wealthy at death, but his wealth came from other investments. The hotel had been a steady drain on his fortune throughout his adult life. These men shared certain characteristics: immense ambition, vast wealth, absolute confidence in their own judgment, and a collective blindness to economic reality. They believed that grandeur created value. They believed that prestige could be converted into profit. They believed that buildings could justify their own expense through sheer magnificence. They were wrong on all counts, but their wrongness created something accidentally valuable. They built hotels so well, so durably, so beautifully, that the buildings transcended their creators' failed business models. The hotels could be repurposed, restructured, and operated profitably once freed from the burden of financing their builders' egos. This was not the legacy they intended. They wanted to be remembered as visionary builders who created timeless monuments. Instead, they're remembered as cautionary tales. Rich men who built beautiful buildings they couldn't afford, giants who fell not from external force, but from internal contradiction. Their ambition exceeded their resources. Their dreams exceeded their grasp. The buildings survived, the builders collapsed, the monuments endured, the men crumbled. This reversal would have horrified them. They built these structures to cement their names in history. History remembers the structures. The names are footnotes. William Waldorf Astor wanted the Waldorf to make people speak his name for centuries. It did, but not admiringly, historically, as the man who built a hotel so expensive he couldn't keep it. That's his immortality, not the celebration he imagined, the irony he feared. The fall of these giants wasn't gradual, it was catastrophic. One generation controlled vast wealth. The next generation struggled to maintain it. The third generation lost it entirely. 3 generations from riches to rags. The hotels they built to prevent that decline instead accelerated it by consuming resources faster than they could be replenished. In the end, every single one of the original builders lost control of their creation. Death took some. Bankruptcy took others. Economic pressure forced the remainder. Not one of them succeeded in creating a sustainable family legacy through hotel ownership. Not one of them passed their monument to their grandchildren intact. The buildings outlived them, but their control didn't. That was the price of their ambition. They reached for immortality through architecture. They achieved architectural permanence, but they lost everything else in the process, surviving what should have died. It's one thing to survive. It's another to thrive when you were never meant to succeed in the first place. The Waldorf Astoria's transformation began with a simple realization. Location mattered more than luxury. The hotel sat at 5th Avenue and 34th Street, one of Manhattan's most valuable intersections. The building might lose money, but the land underneath it appreciated constantly. This created a strange situation where the property had value even though the business didn't. In 1929, developers approached the hotel's owners with a proposal: demolish the building and construct a skyscraper. Office space commanded premium rent. The location was perfect for commercial development. They offered $20 million for the property. The owners accepted. The original Waldorf Astoria was torn down in 1930. But here's where the story turns unexpected. The hotel operators didn't disappear. They took the $20 million and built a new Waldorf Astoria at Park Avenue and 50th Street. Bigger, more modern, and crucially, designed for profitability rather than prestige. The new hotel opened in 1931 with 2,200 rooms. It was the largest hotel in the world. The economics worked this time. The hotel was built with investor money, not personal wealth. It operated under professional management from day one. Staff ratios were sensible. 2 employees per 3 rooms rather than 2 employees per room. Costs were controlled. Efficiency was prioritized. The hotel made money within 2 years, despite opening during the Great Depression. The Waldorf Astoria name survived the death of the Waldorf Astoria building. The brand proved more valuable than the structure. This was the first hint of what these hotels would become. Not monuments to individuals, but enduring brands that could outlive their original physical manifestations. The Plaza discovered a different path to survival. After Conrad Hilton purchased it in the 1940s, he recognized something crucial. The hotel's greatest asset wasn't its marble or its chandeliers. It was its reputation. The Plaza meant something. Staying there signaled status. That intangible value could be monetized if managed correctly. Hilton kept the grand public spaces, but made them work harder. The Palm Court, which had been a money-losing tea room, was repositioned as a destination dining experience. Prices were raised. Marketing emphasized the exclusivity. Suddenly, people were willing to pay premium prices for afternoon tea specifically because it was at the Plaza. The space that lost money as a convenience became profitable as a destination. The ballrooms underwent similar transformation. Instead of renting them at below cost to maintain social connections, Hilton charged market rates. If customers valued the Plaza name enough to choose it over competitors, they would pay for that value. They did. Wedding receptions, corporate events, charity galas, all paid premium prices for the prestige of hosting their event at the Plaza. Revenue from event spaces tripled within 5 years. Guest room revenue benefited from the same principle. Hilton could charge more because people wanted to stay at the Plaza specifically. The premium wasn't for the room itself, but for the story they could tell afterward. "I stayed at the Plaza." That sentence had value. Hilton captured that. Value in room rates 20% higher than comparable hotels. The Breakers' survival as a museum represented perhaps the most radical transformation. The house that cost $700,000 annually to maintain as a residence generated $150,000 annually as a tourist attraction by 1950. Not enough to be profitable, but enough to dramatically reduce the subsidy required from the Preservation Society's endowment. As tourist interest grew, so did revenue. By 1960, the house was generating $400,000 annually from admissions, tours, and gift shop sales. Operating costs had been reduced to $300,000 through efficiency improvements. The house was profitable. A residence that bankrupted its owners became a museum that paid for itself. The transformation succeeded because the Preservation Society understood something the Vanderbilts didn't. The Breakers had value not as a home, but as a historical artifact. People would pay to see how the extremely wealthy lived. The house became educational entertainment. Every room told a story. Every detail revealed the Gilded Age. Tourists left understanding both the grandeur and the excess. The very features that made it unsustainable as a residence made it compelling as a museum. Across all these properties, a pattern emerged. Survival required accepting that the original vision was wrong. The buildings themselves were fine. The business models were broken. Fix the business model, and the buildings thrived. Maintain the original vision, and everything collapsed. This acceptance came easier for new owners who felt no loyalty to the builder's dreams. They could evaluate the properties objectively. What works? What doesn't? What changes will improve financial performance? These questions, which the original owners couldn't ask honestly, became the foundation of revival. The Plaza added another innovation in the 1960s: residential condominiums. The upper floors were converted into luxury apartments. Wealthy New Yorkers paid millions to live at the Plaza address. The hotel gained a stable revenue stream from sales and monthly maintenance fees. The condominiums subsidized the hotel operations below. The building finally achieved the financial stability its original builders had imagined but never created. The Waldorf Astoria expanded internationally. Hotels opened in Hong Kong, Dubai, Amsterdam, and dozens of other cities. The brand became global. Each new hotel paid licensing fees to use the Waldorf Astoria name. The original New York property, which lost money for its builder, became the foundation of a worldwide hotel empire, generating hundreds of millions in annual revenue. The breakers spawned an entire industry. Mansion museums became a recognized category of tourism. Other Gilded Age estates followed the same model. Biltmore in North Carolina, the Marble House in Newport, Hearst Castle in California, all converted from private residences to public attractions, all profitable. The template proved widely applicable. These transformations revealed a fundamental truth about value. Buildings have inherent worth independent of their creators' intentions. A well-built structure in a good location will find uses. It will adapt. It will survive. The original purpose might fail, but the building itself persists and discovers new purposes. The original owners never understood this. They believed their hotels had value because of their vision, their wealth, their social position. Remove those elements, and the hotels would collapse. Wrong. The hotels had value because they were well built, well located, and served real human needs. The vision was optional. The wealth was temporary. The social position was irrelevant. The buildings endured because they were genuinely useful. Survival required killing the myth that grandeur creates value, grandeur creates expense. Value comes from utility. Once the hotels accepted this, once they operated as businesses rather than monuments, they thrived. The original builders fought this truth until it destroyed them. The new owners embraced it and prospered. The hotels built to bankrupt their creators became the hotels that outlived them, not despite their grandeur, but by subordinating that grandeur to business logic. Beauty served profit rather than pride. Marble halls attracted paying guests rather than impressing social rivals. The chandeliers lit commercial success rather than personal vanity. In transforming from monuments to businesses, these hotels achieved something their builders never imagined: true sustainability. They could survive economic downturns. They could adapt to changing tastes. They could maintain themselves indefinitely without external subsidy. They had become financially immortal in a way their mortal creators never achieved. The buildings won, the builders lost. And the victory came from accepting that buildings are not monuments. They are tools, magnificent tools, beautifully crafted tools, historically significant tools, but tools nonetheless. And tools must justify their existence through use, not appearance. That lesson took 50 years to learn, but once learned, it transformed failure into enduring success. Reborn in the ashes, these hotels, once symbols of unsustainable wealth, would soon come to represent something far more valuable: survival. By 1950, a remarkable fact had emerged. Every major hotel built during the Gilded Age was still operating. The buildings that were supposed to collapse without their creators' wealth had not only survived, but thrived. They had outlived their builders, outlived the Gilded Age itself, and outlived the economic assumptions that created them. The new Waldorf Astoria on Park Avenue became the most successful hotel in New York. It hosted presidents, celebrities, and foreign dignitaries. The presidential suite became a permanent, residence for former President Herbert Hoover. He lived there from 1942 until his death in 1964. The hotel that William Waldorf Astor couldn't make profitable became home to an American president for 22 years. The irony was perfect. Astor built his hotel to demonstrate wealth and power. It achieved that, but only after his family lost control. The building fulfilled its creator's vision, just not for its creator. This pattern repeated across all the surviving hotels. The plaza became synonymous with New York luxury. Books were written about it. Movies featured it. The hotel appeared in cultural consciousness as a symbol of elegant living. None of this happened while the original builders controlled it. The cultural significance emerged after bankruptcy forced sale to owners who understood branding. The Breakers became one of America's most visited historic houses. Over 400,000 people toured it annually by 1970. Revenue from admissions exceeded $1 million per year. The house that cost the Vanderbilt family $700,000 annually to maintain generated profit for its new owner. The transformation from private burden to public asset was complete. These revivals shared common elements. Professional management replaced family control. Business logic replaced ego logic. Market forces replaced social competition. In every case, removing the original owner improved financial performance. The buildings didn't need their creators. The creators needed the buildings. And when that relationship reversed, the buildings flourished. The hotels also benefited from broader economic trends. Post-war prosperity created a new class of wealthy Americans who wanted luxury experiences. Business travel increased dramatically. Tourism became a major industry. The demand for high-end hotel rooms grew faster than supply. The grand hotels, already built and beautifully located, captured this growing market, but they captured it on new terms. The post-war luxury guest wanted quality service, not servitude. They wanted comfort, not ostentation. They wanted efficiency, not excess. The hotels adapted. Staff became professionally friendly rather than obsequiously deferential. Rooms emphasized function as much as beauty. Service meant solving problems, not anticipating unstated desires. This shift reduced costs while maintaining satisfaction. Fewer staff delivering better defined services cost less than armies of servants trying to anticipate every whim. Guests paid for results, not headcount. The hotels delivered results at lower cost than the original model required. Profit margins improved. Technology helped tremendously. The original hotels relied on human labor for everything. Temperature control required workers adjusting vents. Communication required bellhops delivering messages. Accounting required clerks writing in ledgers. By 1960, technology handled much of this. Automated climate control, telephones in every room, computerized accounting. Labor costs declined while service quality improved. The Waldorf Astoria installed one of the first computerized reservation systems in 1962. It could track availability across all 2,200 rooms instantly. Before computers, this required a staff of 20 people managing paper records. After computers, 3 people could handle the same work. The $20,000 annual software cost replaced $150,000 in annual labor costs. Technology made the economics work. The plaza underwent major renovation in 1965. The project cost $12 million, but transformed the hotel. Modern plumbing, updated electrical systems, improved climate control. The building kept its historic character, but gained contemporary efficiency. Revenue per room increased 40% after renovation. The investment paid for itself in 7 years. These reinvestments were possible because the hotels now generated surplus cash flow. Under the original owners, operating losses consumed all available capital. Nothing remained for improvements. Under professional management, profits funded reinvestment. The hotels entered a virtuous cycle. Profits enabled improvements. Improvements increased revenue. Increased revenue generated more profits. The breakers followed a similar path. The Preservation Society invested $2 million in 1975 to restore deteriorated elements. The investment came from accumulated surpluses and targeted fundraising. After restoration, visitor numbers increased 30%. The house became more popular as it became more historically accurate. Authenticity attracted tourists. Marketing transformed how these properties reached customers. The original builders relied on social connections and word of mouth. If you were wealthy enough to stay at the plaza, you already knew about it. This limited the customer base. Professional managers recognized that luxury could be democratized. You didn't need to be a millionaire to afford one night at a grand hotel. You just needed to value the experience enough to spend more than usual. Advertising campaigns positioned these hotels as affordable splurges. Save up and stay at the plaza for your anniversary. The message resonated. Middle-class customers who would never buy a mansion could still experience historic luxury for a weekend. Revenue from this broader customer base exceeded revenue from the narrow elite the hotels originally targeted. The hotels also discovered non-room revenue streams. Restaurants became destinations for locals. The Waldorf Astoria's Peacock Alley drew regular lunch crowds. The Palm Court at the plaza became famous for afternoon tea. These dining experiences generated significant revenue independent of overnight stays. The restaurants filled during weekday lunch when rooms sat empty. The economics of space utilization improved dramatically. Gift shops represented another innovation. The breakers sold books, postcards, and reproductions of decorative elements. Visitors wanted souvenirs. The gift shop met that demand profitably. Revenue from retail sales added 15% to total income. It wasn't much individually, but compounded over millions of visitors, it mattered. Event hosting became increasingly important. Corporate meetings, weddings, conferences, all paid premium rates to use historic spaces. The plaza earned more from events than from room rentals by 1980. The ballrooms that originally existed to host vanity social functions became profit centers hosting events for paying customers. Each revenue stream reinforced the others. Tourists who visited the breakers bought gifts. Conference attendees who met at the plaza booked rooms. Wedding guests who attended receptions at the Waldorf Astoria returned for personal stays. The hotels became integrated destinations, rather than simple accommodation. This diversification protected against downturns. When business travel declined during recessions, tourist visits to the breakers remained stable. When leisure travel slowed, corporate events at the plaza continued. No single revenue stream determined success. The hotels had become resilient through complexity. By 1980, these properties had achieved what their builders never could: financial independence, operational sustainability, continued relevance. They paid their own way. They funded their own improvements. They adapted to changing times without losing their essential character. They had been reborn in the ashes of their builders' failures. The transformation was complete. What began as monuments to ego became monuments to adaptive capitalism. What started as unsustainable vanity projects became sustainable businesses. The buildings survived because they evolved. The builders failed because they couldn't. The endurance of stone and steel While the men who built them are long gone, these hotels remain, etched into the skyline like timeless monuments of ambition and ruin. The current Waldorf Astoria on Park Avenue has operated continuously since 1931. 90 years and counting. It has hosted every American president since Herbert Hoover. It has been the site of historic diplomatic meetings, celebrity weddings, and cultural milestones. The hotel has become an institution independent of any individual owner. The building was sold to a Chinese insurance company in 2014 for $1.9 billion. Nearly $2 billion for a hotel. William Waldorf Astor spent $17 million building the original. His great-great-grandchildren could never imagine a hotel selling for 100 times that amount. Yet that's exactly what happened. The sale demonstrated something profound. The value wasn't in the original building, which was demolished. It wasn't in the Astor name, which was just one of many owners over the decades. The value was in the brand itself. Waldorf Astoria meant luxury, history, prestige. That meaning was built over a century through thousands of guest experiences. It transcended any single person or family. The new owners announced plans to convert most of the building into condominiums while maintaining a smaller hotel operation. The transformation continues. The building that was a hotel becomes partially residential. Function adapts to market demand. The marble and steel remain. The use changes. This is the ultimate endurance. Not rigidity, but flexibility. The plaza has undergone similar evolution. In 2008, it converted to a mixed-use property. 150 hotel rooms remain. The rest became residential condominiums selling for millions per unit. The hotel that was too large to operate profitably at 800 rooms thrives at 150. Size flexibility created financial sustainability. The building itself was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1969. This designation prevented demolition and restricted alterations to the facade. The plaza can never be torn down. It must endure by law. The building achieved the permanence its creators wanted, enforced by government mandate rather than family wealth. The breakers received similar protection. It was designated a National Historic Landmark in 1994. Over 1 million people visit annually. It generates over $10 million in economic impact for Newport. A private mansion that benefited 7 people now benefits an entire city. The transformation from private wealth to public good is complete. These buildings endure physically because they were built extraordinarily well. The Waldorf Astoria used steel frame construction, revolutionary for its time. The steel doesn't corrode. The structure remains sound after 90 years. The plaza's foundation goes down to bedrock. The building will stand for centuries. The breakers is built of limestone, brick, and steel. Properly maintained, it will outlast most modern construction. But physical endurance alone doesn't explain their survival. Plenty of well-built buildings have been demolished. These hotels endure because they remain useful. They serve current needs, even as those needs evolve. They adapt without losing identity. This combination of flexibility and authenticity creates lasting value. The hotels also endure culturally. The Waldorf Astoria appears in hundreds of movies, novels, and songs. The plaza is referenced constantly in popular culture. The breakers represents the Gilded Age in American imagination. These cultural associations create value independent of the building's current use. They have become symbols. This symbolic value compounds over time. The longer these buildings stand, the more historically significant they become. A 19th century hotel operating in the 21st century is inherently interesting. It connects present to past. It makes history tangible. People value that connection enough to pay for it. The economics of heritage tourism support this endurance. Millions of people visit historic sites annually. They spend money on admissions, gifts, food, and accommodation. Heritage tourism generates billions of dollars worldwide. The grand hotels and mansions capture a share of that spending. Their age becomes an asset rather than a liability. The hotels also benefit from network effects. The Waldorf Astoria brand now includes dozens of properties worldwide. Each new hotel reinforces the brand's value. Each guest who stays at any Waldorf Astoria property strengthens their connection to the original. The building on Park Avenue anchors a global network generating hundreds of millions in annual revenue. This scalability was impossible under the original ownership model. William Waldorf Astor couldn't franchise his hotel. The concept didn't exist. Modern hospitality. Companies created franchising, licensing, and management contracts that allowed brands to expand without capital requirements. The Waldorf Astoria name now generates value far beyond any single building. The original builders wanted their hotels to establish family dynasties. They failed. But the hotels established brand dynasties instead. The Waldorf Astoria brand is more powerful than the Astor family name. The Plaza brand is more valuable than any individual owner. The buildings transcended their creators by becoming brands. This transcendence required time and accumulated history. A new building can't become historic instantly. It takes decades of operation, thousands of guests, countless stories. The longer these hotels operate, the more stories accumulate. Each story adds value. Each decade adds significance. The buildings endure because they're beautiful, well-located, and historically significant. But they thrive because they're useful businesses serving real needs. Beauty alone doesn't pay property taxes. Location alone doesn't cover payroll. History alone doesn't fund renovations. The combination of aesthetic appeal, strategic position, cultural significance, and business viability creates enduring value. The original builders understood aesthetics and location. They missed business viability and underestimated the importance of accumulated cultural significance. They thought they could create instant legacy through construction. They were wrong. Legacy accumulates through time and use. These hotels have now operated for over a century. They have survived the Gilded Age, 2 world wars, the Great Depression, multiple recessions, social transformations, and technological revolutions. They endure not because they're unchanged, but because they've changed constantly while maintaining essential identity. That's the paradox of endurance. Things that last are not static. They adapt continuously. The hotels that survive are not the ones that perfectly preserve their original form. They're the ones that evolved while keeping what mattered. Function changed. Beauty remained. Use transformed. Character persisted. The stone and steel will stand for centuries more. Long after current owners are forgotten. Long after current guests have died. The buildings will remain, changed but recognizable, adapted but authentic, enduring through relevance rather than mere existence. That's what the builders never understood. Endurance comes not from refusing to change, but from changing intelligently. The monuments they created endure precisely because later owners were willing to transform them. The buildings survived their builder's vision by outliving that vision and discovering new purposes. The ultimate irony remains perfect. The hotels built as monuments to unchanging wealth became monuments to constant adaptation. The structures meant to preserve the past became templates for the future, and the men who wanted to stop time created buildings that moved gracefully through it. The price of immortality. In the end, the cost of these magnificent hotels wasn't just their owners' wealth. It was their lives, their ambitions, and their legacy. William Waldorf Astor spent $17 million and countless hours building a hotel he operated at a loss for 30 years. What did he gain? His name on a building he didn't control. Recognition as a man who built something beautiful he couldn't afford. A legacy of ambition exceeding capability. He traded tangible wealth for intangible fame. Whether the trade was worth it remains debatable. John Jacob Astor IV died at age 47 in the North Atlantic. He gave up his seat in a lifeboat and perished. In his final moments, did he think about the Astoria Hotel? Did he regret the millions spent on marble lobbies? We'll never know. What we do know is that his monument to himself outlived him by exactly 7 years under family control. Then it was sold. His name remained on the building. His family's ownership did not. Cornelius Vanderbilt II died at 55, partially from the stress of maintaining his vast holdings. The Breakers was supposed to be a relaxing summer retreat. Instead, it became another source of stress. Managing the house, paying the bills, justifying the expense. The retreat became a burden. He died younger than necessary, worn down by the very symbols of his success. These men paid in years. The stress of maintaining unsustainable luxury shortened their lives. The constant worry about costs, the pressure to maintain appearances, the knowledge that their monuments required endless subsidy, all of it accumulated as physical stress that manifested as stroke, heart disease, and premature death. They also paid in family relationships. The competition between William Waldorf Astor and John Jacob Astor IV destroyed family unity. They built competing hotels next door to each other out of spite. Family gatherings became uncomfortable. Thanksgiving dinners were tense. Weddings required careful seating arrangements. The hotels that were supposed to cement family legacy instead divided the family. The Vanderbilt children watched their inheritance consumed by the Breakers. Alice spent the family fortune maintaining one house. Her children received less than they might have because mother prioritized preservation. Resentments developed. Some children wanted to sell immediately after Cornelius died. Alice refused. The children waited decades for control, watching wealth evaporate annually. When they finally inherited, less remained than expected. George Bolt's price was perhaps highest of all. He built a castle to show love for his wife. She died before it was completed. He couldn't bear to finish it. The unfinished castle became a monument to loss rather than love. He visited once more before his own death, walked through the empty halls, and never returned. His immortality project became a tomb for his grief. But the price wasn't just personal, it was philosophical. These men believed that wealth could buy permanence. They believed that money could create something that outlasted death. They believed that stone and steel could preserve their names forever. They were both right and wrong in ways they never anticipated. The buildings did outlast them. The names did endure, but not in the way intended. They're remembered not as visionary builders, but as cautionary tales. Their names appear in books like this one, explaining how grand ambitions can lead to financial ruin. That's their immortality, not celebration, education. The deeper price was the lost opportunity. The millions spent on unsustainable hotels could have been invested in productive enterprises. William Waldorf Astor could have built apartment buildings that generated steady income. The capital wasted on the Waldorf could have created actual wealth for his descendants. Instead, it created losses that consumed other wealth. Cornelius Vanderbilt II could have endowed universities or funded medical research. The $7 million spent on the breakers could have created institutions bearing his name that did genuine good. Instead, it built a mansion that became too expensive for his family to keep. The opportunity cost of vanity is measured in abandoned possibilities. Yet there's another perspective. These men did create something lasting. The buildings stand. Millions of people have experienced beauty they created. The hotels employed thousands over generations. The cultural contribution, while unintended, was real. Maybe the price was worth paying from society's perspective, even if it wasn't from the builder's perspective. The Waldorf Astoria has hosted historic diplomatic meetings. Perhaps some of those meetings prevented conflicts. Perhaps lives were saved because leaders met in beautiful neutral settings. Can we measure that value? Can we say the cost wasn't worth it? The calculation becomes impossible. The Breakers educates visitors about Gilded Age excess. People leave understanding that vast wealth doesn't guarantee happiness. They see the beautiful prison that trapped the Vanderbilts. That lesson has value. Would future generations understand Gilded Age culture as clearly without the Breakers as physical evidence? Probably not, so perhaps Cornelius Vanderbilt's sacrifice served a purpose, just not his intended purpose. The hotels became accidental public goods. Built for private vanity, they evolved into shared cultural resources. This transformation required the builders to lose control. Their failure enabled public benefit. Had they succeeded in creating sustainable family ownership, the hotels might have remained private. Failure democratized access. This suggests a strange kind of justice. The builders wanted exclusive monuments. They got inclusive institutions. They wanted family legacies. They created public heritage. Their desires were thwarted. But something valuable emerged from the thwarting. The universe delivered outcomes better than what they sought, just not in the form they wanted. The price of immortality, then, was accepting that immortality wouldn't arrive on their terms. The buildings would outlast them. The names would endure. But the meaning would be rewritten by later generations. They couldn't control their own legacy beyond the grave. They could only create the raw material. Others would interpret it. This loss of narrative control was perhaps the highest price. These men were accustomed to shaping their own stories. They managed their public image carefully. They controlled what newspapers wrote. They influenced how they were perceived. But after death, that control vanished. Historians and biographers wrote different stories. The careful image was replaced with more complex truth. William Waldorf Astor wanted to be remembered as a visionary who created beauty. He's remembered as a rich man who spent unwisely. John Jacob Astor IV wanted to be known as a successful businessman. He's remembered for dying on the Titanic. Cornelius Vanderbilt II wanted recognition as an empire builder. He's remembered for building a house his family couldn't keep. None of these men got the legacy they paid for. They got different legacies, assigned posthumously by people who didn't share their values. That's the price of immortality. You achieve it. But you don't get to define it. Perhaps the ultimate lesson is this: buildings outlast people. But people can't control how buildings will be used or what they'll mean after death. The builders created structures. Society determined meaning. That separation between creation and interpretation represents the unbridgeable gap between mortal ambition and immortal consequence. The hotels stand as monuments not to their builders' wisdom, but to the gap between intention and outcome. They teach us that grand gestures don't guarantee desired results. That wealth can't purchase meaning. That immortality comes at a price measured not just in dollars, but in surrendered control over your own story. These magnificent hotels cost their creators everything they spent, and more. Money was the smallest part. They paid with stress, family unity, opportunity cost, and ultimately control over their own legacies. They bought immortality. They received it. But immortality proved far more expensive and far less satisfying than they ever imagined. The buildings won, the builders lost, and we, the inheritors of their accidental legacy, benefit from their magnificent failure. That might be justice. It might be tragedy. Most likely, it's both.